Here we are on my desktop. This is where we'll be doing all of our configuration and remote administration. I already have Windows Admin Center installed, as well as the Remote Server Admin tools. I downloaded both of these from Microsoft's download site. Windows Admin Center is a web-based administration tool that will use Edge. So if I open up Admin Center, it opens inside Edge, and on this first screen you can see a list of all the connections that I've established. Windows Admin Center will always connect to the local desktop, and you can see I've added a connection to DC. We're going to be deploying 2 domain controls as part of this course, so I need to add a connection to DC2. So if I click on Add, and then to add DC2, if I say Add Windows Server, and we can provide a connection tag and the name of the server that I'd like to connect to. It should take just a few seconds to find the server on your network. And here we can see it's found DC2. If I select Add Now, it adds DC2 to the list of servers that I can manage through Windows Admin Center. Notice the Managing As section here. This is the name of the admin user that has admin privileges on those remote machines. We'll start off by configuring DC and then configure DC2. So if you select DC from the list, it will take you to the server management screen for DC. Once DC's server management screen has opened up, if we scroll down, we are looking for the Roles and Features section. If we select Roles and Features, we can see a list of roles and features that are already installed, and roles and features that can be installed. This server will become the first domain controller for our brand new Active Directory Forest. Before you can promote this machine to become a domain controller, you must install Active Directory Domains and Services. Here you can see Active Directory Domains and Services available. So if we select that role and then click Install, first of all, dependencies will be calculated, and you may see a longer list of dependencies than mine. If you're happy with the list of dependencies, you can choose Yes to install this role. There's also a tick box to allow the server to be rebooted if required. I'll tick the Reboot the server automatically box, and then Yes. Now, depending on the size of the role, it can take a couple of minutes just to deploy this. You can monitor the role deployment by looking at the notification section, and you can monitor the progress of the role being installed. Domains and Services is a relatively small role, so it shouldn't take that long. Excellent. You can see now that the role's been installed successfully on DC. We close the notification screen, and you can close the notification screen while that role is installing. Now the role's installed, we're ready to promote this machine to become a domain controller. Now we're going to do that from Server Manager. So I'm going to minimize Windows Admin Center. And I've already got Server Manager pinned to my taskbar. So I'm going to select Server Manager. And again, Server Manager is installed when you install the Remote Server Admin tools. If I maximize this screen, and then go to the All Servers list, here we can see that DC and DC2 are already added. If you want to add additional servers to this list of servers to manage, if you right-click All Servers, you can select Add Servers. Notice the yellow exclamation mark. If I click on that, it tells me that configuration is required for DC, and the configuration is to promote this server to be a domain controller. So it's recognised that domain services has been installed, and now I have to complete the promotion process. So if I click on the link that says promote this server to a domain controller, it will start the Active Directory Domain Services configuration wizard. Here we've got 3 choices. Add the domain controller to an existing domain, add a new domain to an existing forest, or create a new forest. We want to create a new forest. So if I select that radio button, we'll be asked for the name of the root domain for our forest. Now our name is going to be company.pri. You type that name in and then say next. The next screen asks us several things. First of all, it asks us about the functional level for our domain and forest. If you click on the drop down, you'll notice that Windows Server 2016 is the highest forest and domain functional level available today. We will discuss functional levels in a later module. We're also asked here whether we want to install DNS or not. Now, as stated previously, you do not have to use Microsoft DNS service. If you have a DNS service already in place, you would add company.pri as a hosted domain, and then all your domain controllers would register beneath there. For the company.pri forest, we're going to let the domain services configuration wizard install the DNS role as well. By allowing DNS to be installed, a primary DNS zone will be added for company.pri on this server. Notice that the global catalog tick box is also selected, and this cannot be unticked. You are required to have at least one global catalog server in your forest, and as this is the first domain controller, it also becomes a global catalog server. Global catalog servers are discussed in the next module. Also discussed in a later module are read-only domain controllers. As this is the first domain controller online in your forest, it cannot be a read-only domain controller. You're also asked for a password. This password, along with the username administrator, is used to access Directory Services Restore mode. This mode is useful when troubleshooting Active Directory. It allows us to perform restores from backup, as well as other Directory Service maintenance tasks. Provide a password here, and select Next. This warning appears. A delegation for this DNS server cannot be created because the authoritative parent zone cannot be found. This warning is often displayed when we add our first domain controller. It's warning us that it's done a DNS lookup and can't find a domain called company.pri. Well, that's okay. It would be a problem if we use an existing DNS server, but as the installation wizard will be installing its own DNS system and adding company.pri as a primary zone, we can ignore this warning. Click Next. On our next screen, it may take a minute, but a NetBIOS name will be provided. NetBIOS names are still required for our domain. If you'd like to change the NetBIOS name, you can. We'll leave ours at company. If we choose Next, now we get to the path section. Here we can see three default paths. One for our database file ntds.dit, one for our log files, and one for sysvol. Sysvol is where we'll find our group policies. When we create group policies, they are added to the sysvol folder and replicated from there between all our domain controllers. When we make changes to our domain database, those changes are written to log files first, before being committed to the main database file ntds.dit. If you like, you can change these default paths, perhaps separating out the three different sets of files to different RAID arrays. These paths can be changed at a later date. If you're happy with these paths, select Next. We now come to the review screen where we can review our options. We can also select View Script. Here we can see the PowerShell commands that we could have used to do the same deployment from PowerShell. You can save this and analyse it at a later time. I'm just going to close this down. I'm happy with all the choices, so I select Next. The system will do some prerequisite checks, and usually there are a few warnings for you to have a read through. Have a read through the warnings and address any that are a concern for your deployment. None of these warnings will prevent your forest from being deployed and the domain controller being created inside that forest. So the final step is to say install. What I will do now is pause the video and come back to this screen once the installation is completed. So my installation of DNS and Active Directory Domain Services took less than a minute, and if everything's successful, we should get this message: this server was successfully configured as domain controller. If we click Close to close this wizard, that domain controller will need to be rebooted. Now it should restart automatically. If it doesn't restart automatically, restart the DC using Server Manager, or we can do it through Admin Center. If I right click the DC here, I could say Restart, or through Admin Center, we can select Overview and Restart. Give your DC a couple of minutes to restart, and then we can verify installation before adding our second domain controller to our brand new forest. To quickly verify that your domain controller and your Active Directory forest have been installed, if you click back to Server Manager, once in Server Manager, if you go to your All Servers list, and then right click your new DC and choose a tool like Active Directory User Computers. What you should find is that Active Directory User Computers opens up, and if you navigate through company.pri, in the domain controllers section, you should see your DC listed. Another tool, if we close down Active Directory User Computers, again right click on DC, and then select Active Directory Sites and Services. From inside here we can navigate down, and under Default First Site, under Servers, again you should see your domain controller listed. There are more verification steps that we can go through, and we'll be seeing some of these in our next module. Right now our domain is vulnerable. Because we only have a single DC, if that domain controller was to fail, we would lose access to our domain database. So we need to add a second domain controller. Let's go back to Admin Center. In Admin Center, we've got DC2. So if you select DC2, we need to go through a similar set of steps. First of all, by adding the Active Directory Domain Services role. So we scroll down, select Roles and Features, tick the box next to Active Directory Domain Services, and choose to install. Like in the previous example, we'll see a list of roles and features that will need to be installed, and again I can select Reboot this server automatically if required, and yes. It will just take a minute to install the Active Directory Domain Services role. Once installed, we'll promote this machine to be an additional domain controller. One thing to check before you promote this machine is its network settings. We need to make sure that we use the same DNS server for both of our domain controllers. If you scroll up in Windows Admin Center and select Networks, then choose the network card for DC2, and under Details, you should be able to verify the DNS server settings. Here we can see the DNS server address for DC2. This is the IP address of DC. Now it is common to install DNS on both domain controllers so that you've got redundancy for the DNS service as well. For more information on installing DNS, you can view the Installing and Configuring the Windows Server 2019 Pluralsight course. So let's continue with our promotion by using Server Manager. Inside Server Manager with DC2 selected, you should notice the yellow exclamation mark again. If not, under Tasks, with DC2 selected, choose Refresh. If we select the yellow exclamation mark and choose Promote this server to a domain controller, this time we are adding an additional domain controller to an existing domain. Now the domain name here is filled in for me, company.pri, and we may also have to provide credentials to facilitate this installation. So if we select Change, we need to provide credentials of a user with domain admin rights. Now I've got a user called mbrown created that I can use for this, so I can provide the credentials here, select OK, and then Next. On the next screen we have a few options. First of all, do we want this machine to be a DNS server or not? And do we want it to be a global catalog server or not? Untick the box that says global catalog server, and we'll promote this machine to be a global catalog server in a later section. Also notice that this machine will become a DNS server. If we're happy to choose Next, we'll see the same warning about delegation for DNS, but again, as the wizard installing DNS for us, we can say Next. And on the additional options screen, we can choose how we're going to replicate the domain database. Now our domain database is relatively small, it's brand new for us, so we can choose to select replication from any domain controller. On the drop down list, we can also see dc.company.pri. As that's our only domain controller, it really doesn't make a difference which one of these we select. In our next module, we'll look at Install from Media. Select Next, and we get to the Path section again, and Next, Review Options. So as long as we're okay with our review, we can continue. Again, if you wish, you can view script, and see the PowerShell commands that would have been used to install this additional domain controller. After a final prerequisite check, installation can proceed. Because we've just added our forest, It won't take long at all for this domain controller to be promoted. It will need a reboot, so if it doesn't reboot automatically, make sure you reboot the DC. And then you can verify the domain controller's installation in the same way we did previously, by using tools like Active Directory User Computers and Active Directory Sites and Services to make sure DC2 has been added.